Please welcome Francesca Choi Key.
Ifemelu had grown up in the shadow of her mother's hair. It was black, so thick it drank 2 containers of relaxer at the salon, so full it took hours under the hooded dryer and, when finally released from pink plastic rollers, sprung free and full, flowing down her back like a celebration.
I think Nigerians, the hair, I've just come, so I did a number of events in Lagos, and hair often came up, and it would be women saying, and I also noticed that many of the women who came to my events came with their natural hair, which I thought, yes, that's a good sign.
Triumph. Yeah.
So I thought that my carefully calibrated plan to change the world and have not only black women, all women wear afros. That is the plan.
Reluctantly, braiders said it cut them like a knife. One day, the year Ifemelu turned 10, her mother came home from work looking different. Her clothes were the same, a brown dress belted at the waist, but her face was flushed, her eyes unfocused.
Ifemelu's mother, I'm also fond of, but I think the Nigerians here, I hope there are Nigerians here. Niger peeps, where are my peeps? Yes, okay. So my Niger peeps here, I think, recognize her. She's Ifemelu's mother in that sort of, it's well-meaning, and it's a search for meaning, really. I mean, yes, prosperity, but also meaning, because you're living in a country where there's just a sense of uncertainty, so you're searching for meaning, and religion often is the answer. And so I know lots of people who go from church to church, and each church has rules, and so really it was about this woman who's trying to figure things out.
Unwavering, she made a fire near the rubbish dump at the same spot where she burned her used sanitary pads. And first she threw in her hair, wrapped in old newspaper, and then, one after the other, the objects of faith. Dark gray smoke curled up into the air. From the veranda, Ifemelu began to cry because she sensed that something had happened, and the woman standing by the fire, splashing in more kerosene as it dimmed and stepping back as it flared. The woman who was bald and blank was not her mother.
Questions from our audience.
In terms of the race issue, it's interesting. And I think part of the problem is because for African Americans here, they have, it's hard to get a true sense of what the real Africa is and the real African, just because of traditionally the way Africa has been portrayed in media. And then vice versa too. If you're back on the African continent, we get a very unrealistic, often actually very negative depiction of African Americans.
I think if we, and by we I mean we sort of Africans who come to the US are honest, there's a relative privilege to being, that the mainstream American culture gives you if you're black but not African American. So I have very often, somebody has said to me, oh, you don't have the issues they have. Oh, you're not angry like they are. And that sort of thing. And, there's just something about it that I deeply dislike, because you're being forced to be complicit in something that you don't want to be. But, there's a... Okay.
Even though he went to church only for weddings and funerals, he would get into heaven on the wings of her faith. But after that afternoon, her God changed. He became exacting. Relaxed hair offended him. Dancing offended him. She bartered with him, offering starvation in exchange for prosperity, for job promotion, for good health. She fasted herself bone thin Dry fasts on weekends and on weekdays, only water until evening.
Very enlightening indeed. I've always been a fan of Chimamanda Ngozi. I think she's wonderful for the continent.
A little more, to fast a little less, and he always spoke carefully, so that she would not call him the devil's agent and ignore him, as she had done with a cousin who was staying with them. I am fasting for your father's conversion, she told Ifemelu often. For months, the air in their flat was like cracked glass. Everyone tiptoed around her mother, who had become a stranger, thin and knuckly and severe. Ifemelu worried that she would one day simply snap into two and die.
Good evening and welcome to Sahara Reporters, Sahara TV. It's actually an honor to eventually meet with you on your third book, Americanah. Now, I just want to take us back to, obviously recently we lost Chinua Achebe. So as a writer who's coming up, who's already, in his footsteps, what do you think and what do you feel about the loss?
I feel heartbroken.
Right.
In a very personal way. I didn't know him well, but when I heard that he'd passed away, I felt just deeply heartbroken. I still do. It's still very hard for me to talk about him in the past tense, because there's certain people you don't want to die.
Right.
This sounds very silly, but it's true. So I've always wanted Chinua Achebe to be there, just there. I didn't want to see him. I just wanted him to be there, because his presence, there was something about it that for me was nurturing, was important to my work, and I think for my generation. Just that Chinua Achebe is so important. Chinua Achebe is iconic, and I think the world lost a great human being.
Okay, now how do you feel, because Chinua Achebe was one of those guys from the dusty roads of his village, from where he came from. We have people like Ngugi wa Thiong'o from Kenya, who's also a cattle herding character. And then comes you, a girl from a woman from, well, I'm taking it way back, when you grew up into an environment where, you were kind of privileged, I would say, from the average Nigerian child. So would I say you had a silver spoon? Your parents were a professor, your mother a registrar at a university.
I don't think the spoon was silver. I think it was sort of steel, just well-polished steel, not silver.
Okay, so that's kind of like softening it a little bit. But there was a spoon. Now,
yes, there was a spoon. No, but I mean, seriously, you're right. I think there's a relative. However, I mean, Chinua Achebe, you say dusty, but really, for his time and place, his own upbringing was relatively privileged. His father was a Christian missionary. They traveled a lot. His mother was well educated for a woman of her time. So he got a good education. But I suppose in my case, there is a relative privilege there, which I constantly acknowledge. I was fortunate to grow up on a university campus.
There's always a difference in the disparity, where people are classified as born frees, where you're born and everything is kind of like there, even if there are difficulties. So you're one of those born frees in Nigeria.
Look, the problem with this kind of, it's important to acknowledge privilege that one has from birth. But it's also important to acknowledge that it's not just about that. You have to do something with it.
Right.
So it's not as though because my father was a professor, I sat down and my books fell from the sky. So I am a hard worker. I am an obsessive hard worker. I did very well in school. I guess it was also easy for me because I just did well. I was one of those kids but I studied. So in my writing as well, when I'm going to write, I read everything I can find. When I was writing Half of a Yellow Sun, I did the kind of research that one does when one is doing a PhD thesis. So, I work hard, I suppose is what I want to say. So there's the privilege, which I acknowledge and which I know that there are people who don't have it. And I wish everybody did, really. I just wish every child had books in their homes.
Now, how do you feel being considered one of Africa's leading female writers? Because now you stand up right in the echelons with many of them. You have obviously the late Achebe from your country, Wallace Shoyinka. You have Ngugis, and you are here. Has that registered, and how do you feel? Because the world is attention and watching.
Really?
Seriously.
Well, that's news to me. Where's the world? You said female writer, and I just want to take out female.
Okay.
Just writer. No, I say it because it seems to me that when we talk about Wole Soyinka and Chinua Achebe, and we say African writers, but then often when it comes to me, we say African female writer, and I'm thinking, yeah, I mean, I'm female, right? But I'm a writer in the way that they're writers.
I had malaria and prayed over it, and it was cured. My cough disappeared as Pastor started praying. But always her mother went first, gliding and smiling, enclosed in salvation's glow. Later in the service, when Pastor Gideon would leap out in his sharp-shouldered suit and pointy shoes and say, "Our God is not a poor God, amen? It is our portion to prosper, amen." Ifemlu's mother would raise her arm high, heavenward, as she said, "Amen, Father Lord, amen."
First of all, I think that Chimamanda Adichie has been huge for contemporary African writers. I think before her, everyone just knew Chinua Achebe, maybe Nadine Gordimer, etc. But to have her, I think people got again, like, oh, there are people who write on the African continent that are not 50 years old and above. So I think she's amazing, and I think it was really exciting to be here and to just see how she has herself grown. I've read all of her books, starting with Purple Hibiscus, and just seeing how she has grown as a writer, and just to see her on stage. I think I was just telling someone what I really admired about the way she answered the questions was that she didn't seem to be affected, especially considering all of her influence and all of the accolades and acclaim that she's received. She just seemed very unself-conscious and willing to admit that she didn't have all of the answers, which I really respected.
Indifferent about making any religious effort, perhaps because her mother already made so much. Yet her mother's faith comforted her. It was, in her mind, a white cloud that moved benignly above her as she moved.
How can you summarize this book real quick?
I can't. You have to read it. I don't like summarizing novels.
Okay, but you have that radical stance in it where you're telling the truth.
I don't think telling the truth is radical. I think lying is radical. I don't think of myself as radical. I'm a truth teller. But it's my truth. So it's not a truth that everybody has to agree with.
Well, when you talked about African booty scratcher, we've been called that several times as well. So we kind of like feel like, oh, it's not something we talk about in public. But then when you put it in a book, I think that's a radical move that you've made.
That's interesting. It's in the book.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to meet you finally. And I wish you success and more writing.
Thank you, my
Thank
African
you.
brother.